I'd like for everyone to think for a moment about the value of human life. And does one person's life have any more value than another person's? The current fee-for-service healthcare system rations out care based on the patient's ability to pay. I believe this is unethical. It is criminal. 95% of the country is still functioning on this fee-for-service model. I believe everyone should be treated the same. Everyone should have access to primary care regardless of their ability to pay. Hi, I'm Dr. Faisel Syed. Welcome to another episode of Faisel and Friends. We're here because we believe everyone deserves access to quality primary care, and ChenMed needs physicians to take care of them. Today's topic is proper payment for preventive primary care. Dr. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Faisel. It's great to be with you this evening.
I think we should be honest with our audience and let them know where you are joining us from.
I am in one of your guest rooms here, Dr. Syed. We've had a great time being together for a couple of days after we've both gotten vaccinated now.
It's wonderful to have you here. So Dr. Dan is here in my home. I'm so pleased. Dr. Dan will be the moderator and co-host. Robert can't join us tonight. Robert, we miss you, and we'll look forward to having you back soon. Our guest tonight is a friend. He's a true friend. Quickly, we've become friends online, on social media. I remember seeing a couple of the videos and liking them and commenting on them. Over the last year, I was new on social media in 2020 because of COVID, and I was so pleased when I reached out to Dr. Eric Bricker, and I said, Eric, would you be able to come join us to talk about this topic? It was from a couple weeks ago. I saw one, I watch Eric's videos regularly, and there was one video that really stuck out. Fee-for-service payment is dumb. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. Dr. Faisel, Dr. Dan, appreciate it.
We need to have Eric. We need to bring Eric and broadcast Eric from Tampa.
I'll bring my fishing pole. It's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, definitely we'll do that. So let's get started. Eric, the show you had a few weeks back on fee-for-service, I mean, that was a pretty bold thing to say, that fee-for-service payment is dumb. Why do you think that?
Yeah, so fee-for-service for primary care is incredibly dumb. And it is incredibly dumb because it does not capture appropriately all of the value that is delivered by a primary care physician. I mean, fee for service, it's essentially, right, before COVID, it was strictly only the in-office patient encounter. And then, yeah, maybe you've got a little bit of telemedicine that you get reimbursed for now. But if you are doing, quote unquote, population health management, if you're doing preventive care, then that is delivering so much value to the individual and then who's ever ultimately paying for, whether that be their employer or a government program like Medicare and Medicaid, in terms of, the partial foot amputation on the diabetic that never happens. The viral pneumonia from the flu that never happens because you had a much higher rate of flu vaccinations in prior years. The MI that never happened. The orthopedic procedure that didn't need to happen and was adequately managed with physical therapy and capsaicin cream. I mean, you name it. There's so much value derived to the individual, the employer, the government program from what the primary care physician does, that for them to get $85, $95, $110, $125 for a 201 or 204 or whatever, then it's ridiculous. It is so stupid. So that's why I said it was dumb. And so the point is, and we'll get into this later on, is there are other ways to compensate primary care physicians other than fee for service that align the incentives of the patient and the physician and allow them to realize so much more value, so much more of the value that they are delivering to the patient. And as a result of that, They don't have to see 25 or 30 patients a day in order to pay for their staff and their lights and their office, et cetera, et cetera. They can see 8 patients a day, 10 patients a day, and spend a half hour or 45 minutes with them and do what actually needs to be done. And there's a whole bunch of detail behind that that I can get into, but that's ultimately the reason why, because fee for service in no way, shape, or form captures the value that's actually delivered by a primary care physician. By the way, health insurance was not invented by primary care physicians. It was invented by surgeons. The original creators of Blue Shield Insurance in Dallas, Texas at Baylor Hospital were surgeons. So primary care physicians never invented health insurance. And, maybe health insurance makes sense. Maybe fee-for-service makes sense for surgeons, but it does not make sense for primary care physicians. I'll pass the floor back to you.
Many residents, we do a lot of lectures on value-based care, with educating about the full risk model in particular, and the focus on reducing all the inefficiencies in primary care delivery with the residents. And one thing that's been coming up with interns now is that this emphasis with CPT codes. And now when you have the interns focused on things like memorizing CPT codes and different ways to bill more, I mean, how can we help swing that pendulum away? Because now we've come to the point now where I remember when I was in residency, there wasn't a focus on the billing. It was still, the focus was still there on the doctor-patient relationship. But now in 2020, 2021, we have interns focused on billing and being efficient at capturing the billing and documenting it more efficiently to get more billing. How can we address that?
Yeah. So again, one of the main differences from fee-for-service primary care and non-fee-for-service primary care, and by the way that non-fee-for-service primary care manifests itself is in a number of ways. So one is in direct primary care, 2 would be for an on-site or a near-site clinic, 3 would be through like a ChenMed model, sort of a full risk where you're being paid a set amount per patient per month, whether it be from the Medicare Advantage insurance carrier or what have you. So being non-fee for service, you can do a variety of things with it. But what's interesting is that, so there was a Wharton School of Medicine podcast about direct primary care and non-fee for service primary care, said that the number of administrative FTEs per physician for non-fee for service primary care is 1.5 administrators per doctor. And in fee for service primary care, it's 4.5 administrators per doctor. Now that's just in the doctor's office. Like, we're not talking about administrators at the hospital or administrators at the insurance company, but basically the doctor has to bill enough. Let's say the doctor's bringing home $200,000 a year. They need to bill the equivalent of that salary plus 4.5 FTEs, which you're talking, I don't know, 60 grand an FTE. So 4.5 times the 60 plus the 200 grand, that's what you got to bill for. And if you're getting, like, you got to sit there with the practice administrator and be like, okay, well, I'm getting $65 a visit. So how many visits do I have to get in order to make that work? Right. And you've got to do the math to make that happen. And you're going to have to capture every single code humanly possible and every single RVU humanly possible in order to not only pay for your salary, but for all those other people's salaries as well, who are not involved in patient care at all. And so it has turned into this massive non-value add bureaucracy, because non-value add bureaucracy makes a lot of money for the people that are in the non-value add bureaucracy business, right? So there's a lot of people in America that are in the non-value add bureaucracy business in healthcare, and you as a physician are driving their payment through meticulous detail at billing, which is wasting your time, right? I mean, that's the whole EMR thing, right? The EMR is essentially a glorified billing system. And, and obviously that's not the right use of the physician's time, that any value to the patient, yada, yada, yada. And so that's where, when you just get rid of it, I mean, I'll talk to employers about direct primary care and they'll be like, okay, but how do they bill the insurance? I'm like, they don't. And they'll say, but how do they deliver care? And I'm like, aha, you don't have to bill insurance to deliver care. There's no rule that says that. When you get your medical license, there's nothing in the state of Texas, medical licensing board that says in order to practice, you have to bill insurance. Like that doesn't exist, right? So imagine that, practicing medicine without billing insurance, right? That's like, it's called the right way to do it. So it's not even a matter of like making a better EMR or, having a mid-level coder or a scribe to help you do that. It's called just doing away with it. Like you don't have to do that. You don't have to do it.
What you're saying is basically system change.
It's system abandonment. There are, right? I mean, and this is there's a very famous political scientist from the 1960s who said, look, any person within an organization has three choices. They can either exit the system, they can be loyal to the system, or they can express their voice to change the system. And this is essentially saying, okay, well, you can just leave. Okay, you can just exit the system of fee for service. You can exit it, and you can do direct primary care. You can do the ChenMed model. You can do an on-site, near-site clinic. So you don't have to just beat your head against the wall for 35 years. You don't have to do that.
Many physicians feel trapped. They feel trapped because of the relationships they have in the communities with the patients as well. Many of the patients feel trapped as well. They don't even know what options they have available to them. But I agree, because I speak with doctors who are trying to figure out ways to make their day-to-day lives better. What would make, like I saw one poll recently, what would make the EHR system function better? What could we do to make the EHRs function better? And ultimately, if the goal is to generate revenue, and we're saying, I think we should start at the place like, hey, what are your thoughts with everyone having access to primary care and not being concerned about paying for the primary care?
Yeah, and those types of discussions, fortunately, are becoming so much more prevalent, right? So I looked up, a few numbers, right? So the number of direct primary care physicians. So there are 465,000 primary care physicians in America, and there are currently 20,000 direct primary care physicians. So it's only 4.5% of all of primary care physicians do direct primary care. Now, okay, 20,000 doctors is a lot of doctors.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a lot of doctors. And, the home in America, the home of direct primary care is Kansas and Colorado, of all places. And, I mean, there are so many resources and there are so many physicians that have been doing this for over 10 years. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't. Okay, so what is what is the sacrifice? There's sort of two categories of physicians that can go into non-fee-for-service primary care. And I'll put them into two categories, young and old. Okay. And the young physicians, you have financial responsibility for your medical school debt, and you may or may not be married. You may or may not have kids. And so what this means is that if you have not bought a big house with a big mortgage, then that really is the best situation to then go into direct primary care. Listen, you live in a small apartment and you live like a resident, where people really get into trouble. It doesn't matter if you do direct primary care or not. As soon as you get out of residency, you start spending a lot of money. Horrible idea. Okay. I drove a used Ford Fusion. Okay. I got it for $7,500. I got it financed, and listen, I mean, do not spend a lot of money. And then when you do whatever this is that you're going to do in the beginning, you're going to make like 80 grand, which is still like double your residency salary. And all your buddies are going to be making, 200 grand, and you're going to be okay with that. Okay. You're going to be like, what's the interest rate on your loan? It's like 2%, right? I mean, you just pay off the ridiculous, like $45 a month. It's like unreal. Right. And you don't worry about it. You're not going to, and yeah, you got to pay for diapers or whatever, but it's called ramen profitable. Right? You're going to have the resident life, and like you're just living that way for the future. And you're doing it because it's the right thing for your patients. You're doing it because it allows you to spend 45 minutes with them. The other study was from the Harvard Business Review that said that if a primary care physician actually followed all the guidelines that they should follow for your typical patient panel of 3,000 patients, that it would require 21 and a half hours a day to do that. Right. Wow. And that is, pardon my French, that's the hell that a primary care physician lives in. And that's why they get burnt out, because they know all the stuff that they need to do, and they know this all the stuff that they're not doing, and they're working as fast as they possibly can to cut as few corners as they possibly can. And it's still not good enough because you're not putting in 21 and a half hours a day.
Mm.
And so you're nervous because you're like, I'm going to miss something. And guess what? You probably are. You probably are, because the math doesn't work. You can't argue with the math. So you got to do what you got to do is you got to bring the patient panel size down. You bring it down from 3,000 to 800. Maybe you bring it down to 500. You got to see fewer patients. Now, the value that you deliver for those 500 to 800 patients is phenomenal. You deliver at least the equivalent of $70 to $140 per patient per month.
Yeah.
So you can easily bring in $500,000 a year, and then you only have to pay for that one other FTE, right? So if you do the math on it, and there's plenty of direct primary care websites, if you do the math on it, you can start paying yourself 250 grand as soon as you fill up your patient panel of 800 patients. And then the other benchmark is that you typically see about 1% of your patients a day. So you're going to see 8 patients a day, and you're going to be like a pediatrician, and you're going to leave room for same day and next day appointments. So some days you'll see 6 and other days you'll see 10, but on average, you're going to see about 8, 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. And you're going to be able to talk to them for 45 minutes and spend the time that you know that you need to do the right thing for these people and their social determinants of health, their behavior modification, talking to them about their depression that's keeping them from really doing the things for their health. And in a 7-minute, 35 patient a day practice, you cannot do that. The math does not work. And so that time is what you're getting in exchange for the greater value extraction that you're getting for the value creation that you're making. So in fee-for-service, you will never extract the value you create. And so you have to change the reimbursement model so that you're actually extracting something equivalent to the value that you're creating, so you can drop your patient panel size down so that you can spend more time with people. And then they're happy. You go on YouTube and see these physicians who have direct primary care. There's this one of this family practice doc in Kansas, in rural Northeast Kansas. And he huge. I mean, the guy's like 6'6", like 330, right? And he was talking about his old job. He was literally crying on stage because it was so bad. And then he's like, and then I moved to direct primary care, and it like seriously changed his life. I mean, it was just so much better. So you're just going to be, I mean, forget about the money. Like you're going to be so much happier, and your patients are going to be so much happier. And if you're young, you got to live ramen. Okay, fine. That's the young physicians. The old physicians, what's happened? You probably got kids that you got to pay for their college. You probably got a big house and a mortgage. You probably have a car payment as well. And so the question becomes, okay, are you willing to take the risk in, frankly, your lifestyle and maybe some of the equity in your house? Are you willing to do that? And frankly, most people are not. So the older physicians that are willing to do that are the ones who were good savers. There's a DPC doc in North Carolina who moved to DPC after being a primary care doc 25 years. And he was just like, look, I had enough money that I knew that if I had a couple of lean years where I didn't make enough, like it was going to be okay, because he was a good saver. So what does that come down to? If you're young, don't go out of hand with the spending. And if you're old, if you've been a prudent saver, then both these type of people, listen, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's very low risk. You just have to do it. Like, in my opinion, your success is guaranteed. You just have to look at all of your peers and say, I'm going to do something different than all of you. Yeah. And that's it's hard to do, right? Especially for the traditionally conservative physician personality. But you have to look at your peers and you have to say, I'm going to do something different from you. And they're going to say you're crazy, and you're going to say like your opinion doesn't matter. I'm going to do it anyway. For the young residents who are coming out, you're going to be like, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give my cell phone number to my patients. And all of your fellow residents are going to be like, you're crazy. You're going to give your cell phone number to your patients. And you're going to like listen to other direct primary care doctors that are like, look, the patients don't really abuse it. Like they don't,
Yeah.
so it's like, it's the road has been traveled before, the path has been paved. And so it's just a matter of just, of just having some faith. And on the flip side of that is so much happiness, so much better patient care, and ultimately you're going to get paid more. So, I mean, I'll stop there because I know you want to talk about some other things.
Well, and I want to ask you, Eric. So I think you're preaching to the believers here about needing to make the change. But how do you do this in the medical industrial complex that exists in this country today? 70% of the physicians are working for hospital systems, and one man's waste is another man's profit. So the money that ChenMed saves comes out of the hospital's bottom lines, and the same for the DPC docs. And I don't think all of the hospital systems are just going to hang it up and go their merry ways and take the losses. Don't we have to change the payment model so that they get bought into this as well, so that they actually are getting paid when, I mean, a health system that's failing because hospitalizations have dropped, isn't that the goal, to have people healthier? And I mean, it happened because of COVID, but what if all of a sudden somebody cured cancer and all of a sudden your hospitalizations dropped? There would be a lot of people that would not be happy about curing cancer in this country.
Yeah, and my answer to that is, at the end of the day, healthcare is not a jobs program. Healthcare is the alleviation of human suffering, the prevention of human suffering, and the staving off of premature death. And if that can be done the right way with fewer people and fewer buildings, then we need to do that. If we don't do that, then we are essentially taking advantage of our patients for the sake of a jobs program. And like we all made an oath not to do that. Okay, so we need to remember why we went into medicine, and what all Dr. Dan, what you learned, and Dr. Faisel, what you learned, and what I learned on the very first day of medical school and every day after that is the patient comes first always. The patient comes first always. The patient comes first always. And if you use that as your guiding principle, then the decisions become incredibly clear. Okay, yes, there's going to be less hospitalizations, but the patient comes first. That means that there's going to be hospital billers that are going to lose their job. Okay, the patient comes first, not the hospital biller comes first. And so, in my mind, it's very simple, in that it's just we just can't think that way. Like, we have to understand that, of course, doing the right thing for patient upsets people. Anybody who's ever worked at a hospital, right? I know a family practice physician in Bradenton, Florida, who is retired now, his whole career in Bradenton. And he said his job, his entire career, was to prevent the specialist from killing his patients. And he would walk into the hospital and, get in fights and put his finger in the chest of all those specialists and be like, you are not going to kill my patient. Okay, so incredibly unpopular. Okay, but by definition, if you're going to do the right thing for your patients, almost invariably you have to do something unpopular. I told the head of the physician group for the hospital, who was a vascular surgeon, that he could not put a renal artery stent in one of my patients. I quickly got a call from my boss. But that was the wrong thing to do. I mean, he was a little dehydrated. His creatinine had bumped. Like, now, I mean, have him come back as an outpatient. Now is not the time to be putting a stent in somebody when he's already gotten 2 CTs and a bunch of contrast. And don't get into a debate about whether or not contrast causes nephropathy, please. Okay, but the point is, I wasn't going to do it. Okay, so all of these things have to be unpopular, and that's okay, right? Because there are ways for you to make money and earn a living and do the right thing. And it involves leaving that exact industrial complex, Dr. Dan, that you just described. Now, Can it be reformed over time? Sure, absolutely. Do we need hospitals in America? Sure, absolutely. Do they need to be, functional and financially viable? Sure, absolutely. But and this is actually part of that political theory of voice, exit, or loyalty, is that exit actually drives the reform even more, right? Because when the physicians start leaving, that creates the pain that is required in order to facilitate the change, right? Without pain, there is no change. If we want the hospital industrial complex to change, it has to have pain. If it doesn't have pain, it will never change. So, I mean, that's just, and I'm not talking, and I don't want to talk on a macro level. I want to talk on you, the individual primary care physician level, that all this is collecting value that you are delivering, and that is impossible in the current fee-for-service system. And all this stuff about ACOs, like where they're literally giving, like some of these ACOs give these physicians $20 per patient per month, or some of the Medicaid plans, they give people $6 per patient per month. And the problem is that's not nearly enough money to drop your patient panel down to the size that it needs to be in order for you to spend the time that you actually need to spend with them. So it's organizing the deck chairs on the Titanic. So these sort of hand-waving things in the vein of quote unquote value-based care and ACOs are, in my opinion, largely ineffective. And you see this because the majority of hospitals are actually leaving their ACO programs. Okay, so ACOs by definition decrease hospital reimbursement, which the hospital doesn't want. Okay, so at the end of the day, like you, the individual, there are options for you, and it does require a leap of faith. But the point is that leap of faith has been done by 20,000 doctors before you. And if they can do it, you certainly can.
Absolutely. The value for the doctor's time with respect to the medical complexity of the patient in the fee-for-service model just does not exist. Because regardless of their medical complexity, like you said, it is a set amount per reactive encounter, per transactional encounter. But when you leave that system, suddenly now, especially when we talk about primary care, you have the primary care doctors. There's all different kinds of primary care doctors, right? There's some primary care doctors that are obviously much more hands-on, much more aggressive, and they may be better at managing patients with multiple chronic comorbidities. And then there may be other doctors who are like, hey, I'm not that hands-on. Maybe they could be focused on less medically complex patients. And then now we've got this incredibly huge workforce of nurse practitioners and physician assistants. When I think about the country as a whole, we have now 330 million Americans. And what's the numbers now with diabetes and pre-diabetes? Now we crossed the 100 million mark with regards to pre-diabetes and diabetic patients. Somewhere like in the 140, 150 million range with cardiovascular disease, which is primarily driven by hypertension. We're at a point right now where this hospital system, like this hospital, whatever the health insurance or healthcare system that we have, which is basically like the sick care hospital system that's helping basically fuel the emergency, like half of all medical care is delivered in the emergency room settings, right? To make that change, I feel like the value of the doctor's time so far, like it's almost like we have to start triaging doctors and their time based on the medical complexity of the patients in front of them. And then you go further down the line because the average American is still only 37, 38 years old. Thank God we have a very young patient population. The issue that we have is the incentive has never been there to improve like prevention. Because if you think about like human nature, if I don't see it or feel it, what do? We just keep pushing through. And we know like 95% of hypertension has no symptoms. So many of these chronic medical conditions, if you don't see it or feel it, just because you don't see it or feel it, doesn't mean it's not there. So it's like the value of the doctor's time with respect to the medical complexity of the patient in front of them. That cannot happen in the fee-for-service model. And that's why I think it's so dumb.
Yeah, it's dumb. And at the end of the day, it's not very enjoyable. It's also just not
Oh,
fun. I mean, it's just like, what do you want to
like the,
do? Right? All
like
of
the
us went
ultimate bait and
into, I'm an
switch.
internist, right? I mean, all of us went into primary care because we just love people and we love
Right.
establishing relationships with those people and we love hearing about them and we love, it's like a puzzle. Like you play detective and you love figuring out. I'm like, oh, you can't read the reason why I've not been able to effectively, like, and this literally happened to me with a woman with real bad COPD. And then her neighbor came in to the visit and you were like, Mrs. D can't read, by the way. I'm like, I've been seeing her for like 8 months. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's like, if you can't figure out people, like we're just repair people, right? If you ever tried to
Exactly.
fix something in 7 minutes, no way. It takes time. I was just working on my sink before doing this podcast, right? I mean, it takes time, right? And we love people and we love solving those complex problems. And you get to do that, right? I mean, it's a joy. I mean, probably one of the most rewarding experiences I ever had as a physician was when just by chance I happened to order an ESR with a woman with like, kind of body aches all over the place. And her ESR was through the roof and she had polymyalgia rheumatica and I gave her steroids and it was like magic. And I mean, she went from not
Yeah.
being able to walk to like the next day, she was literally like jumping around the room. I was shocked. It was unreal. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I mean, just in terms of my own personal satisfaction, selfishly, for me to be able to see that was so much fun. I'm like, I just want to do that like every day. Can I just do that every day? And then I'll be like totally satisfied. So you can get to that.
If you have the time to look into the causes of the causes rather than just reacting to, and our reactions are the same way we react to like the kitchen sink problem. It's a quick fix rather than looking underneath the cabinet. I love it. I'd like to take a quick pause right now before we come back to do. I have a couple closing questions and comments for Dr. Bricker. So let's take a pause real quick for a commercial, and then we'll be back for a couple closing comments and questions. Hold on for about 20 seconds.
ChenMed honors seniors with affordable, top-of-the-line care, and we're expanding. We're opening 25 new centers this year, including centers in 2 new cities, Houston and Detroit. Join us as we bring better healthcare to more seniors. Head to chenmed.com/physicians for more information.
Thank you. And we're back. So Dr. Bricker, I have a question for you about referrals, unnecessary referrals. Now, in the fee-for-service world, we know that primary care is being delivered in the specialty offices. I mean, we have neurologists managing headaches. We have endocrinologists managing insulin-dependent diabetes. We've got orthopedic surgeons managing chronic low back pain. And we all know half of all medical care is delivered in the emergency room setting. We know a lot of primary care is being delivered in the emergency room setting. So with reducing unnecessary referrals outside of the fee-for-service world, what have you learned in your communications and all, especially with direct primary care and really any of the non-fee-for-service models?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And like many things in healthcare, the answer is it depends. Okay. And so specialist referrals are very heterogeneous. They're not a monolith. And so really the big ones for, let's say, especially for seniors, are going to be cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, and then, we'll put cancer in there as well. But really the cardiovascular and the orthopedic, the musculoskeletal ones are the ones that I think are sort of, the more intervenable ones. Okay, fine. How do most people end up getting to a cardiologist, right? So it's typically because they end up in the ER, cardiologist sees them in the ER, maybe they have an observation stay, and then it's cardiac follow-up afterwards, right? Listen, I mean, cardiologists do ED call as a source of their patient volume. That's why they take ED call. They love taking, they as a practice, love taking ED call. That's where they get their patients, is from the ED. Okay. Why did a lot of these people end up going to the ED? because they didn't have a doctor, or if they had a doctor, they could not get in touch with them. Okay. What? The ER is busy at night and on the weekends. Is that because we have some sort of like hormonal response to the moon where we become more sick at night, and some sort of hormonal response to Saturday and Sunday, we become more ill on the weekends? No, it's because you can't access your doctor, right? And a lot of this stuff you can do on the phone, right? You don't have to bring them into the office. But why would the primary care physician not want to do something on the phone? Because there's no reimbursement for it. Well, I can't bill for it. There's no way I'm going to get on the phone for you because I can't bill for it, right? But if you're in a, in some sort of subscription model or DPC model or ChenMed model or, employer clinic model, like, who cares, right? You just take the call, and like you could take care of it, in 10, 15 minutes, whatever, right? So it's like there's so much ER avoidance that can be accomplished in a smaller patient panel size. And yeah, your phone is not going to ring, like crazy. And yes, if you're in a group practice, you can cover each other on the weekends, so you can have weekends. But at the end of the day, that's how medicine used to be practiced, right? I mean, that's just kind of what you did for continuity with your patients. So in terms of like the cardiovascular thing, it's like a lot of it is just, you just got to have earlier access to these folks and greater access to the primary care physician. And a lot of it might be just allaying fears. I mean, literally, we had a plumber who was going to come out. He had to do some work on our house. And he's like, yeah, I'm a little late. I had to go to the doctor. And he just put me on this new blood pressure medication. And I'm nervous about taking it. Okay. And he was on amlodipine. He was on Norvasc. And I'm like, I probably did something I should not have done. I'm like, dude, it's incredibly safe. I'm like, your ankles might swell a little bit, but this is incredible. He's like, yeah, but my mom took medication and she died. I'm like, we've all heard this before. I don't want to go on that insulin. That insulin's going to kill me. I know somebody who went on insulin that killed them, right? I know somebody who went on dialysis that killed them, right? And it's like, we're totally irrational, myself included, when we think about healthcare, right? So we have to have improved access to primary care in order to prevent those cardiologist referrals that shouldn't happen. Now, of course, is there something that comes through the PCP doc that ultimately needs to go to the cardiologist? Absolutely. I'm not saying no. But at the end of the day, that's one. Two, on the orthopedic side, okay, one of my best friends from medical school is an orthopedic surgeon outside of Chicago. And like his name is orthopedic surgeon. Okay. He operates. That's what he does. And at the end of the day, he's like, if I'm not going to operate on you, then I don't really want to see you.
All right.
And guess what? The patient doesn't need to see them, right? And there's so much that can be done with, and what does that do? That saves the orthopedist a ton of time from having to have all these patients coming into their office that aren't operative candidates anyway, right? So there's so much that can be done through, correct, adequate primary care, yada, 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 before they end up going into the orthopedist. So it's just a matter of greater access. And the only way you're right. And listen, doctors, because I'm a doctor, I can pull a doctor card and be like, hey, doctor buddy, I tried to get into your office. Your front staff said I'd have to wait 6 months. And they're like, what? Right? Why do they not go to their primary care physician? The primary care physician doesn't even know that their existing patient appointments are booking out 3 months, right? In Florida, in Southwest Florida, you want to go see a primary care doc? Good luck, right? It's 6 months. Fee for service primary care doc, right? Good luck getting an appointment. So you have no access. So you, the primary care doc, are trying to get in as 35 patients a day. And yet, in your mind, you've got a gazillion patients on your patient panel who are not in your office, and they should be in your office, right? Everybody who does primary care knows that with some of your patients, you need to have a short leash, short leash, right? And then only over time, you let that leash out, right? And I used to see Mr. D weekly, okay? And I kept Mr. D out of the hospital for 3 years. And at the very end of the 3 years, then he finally had a hospital stay. But Mr. D was 76, crazy sick, And I think the only reason I kept him out of the office for 3 years is because I saw him every week. So some people you got to have a crazy short leash on. And again, small patient panel size allows you to do that. Small patient panel size allows you to have same day, next day appointments. Small patient panel size allows you to have these, phone calls with people, keeping them out of the orthopedist and the cardiologist office. So anyway, long answer to your specialist question, but that's how I've seen it happen.
But it comes back again to the value in prevention. That's what we're talking about here. There's a value in prevention that just does not exist in the fee-for-service world. When you mention having patients having access to their doctor's cell phone number, immediately, if you look at it through the lens of a fee-for-service doctor whose time is not valued, you have doctors, board-certified doctors in the fee-for-service primary care world spending their time doing things that other people should be doing. So their time isn't valued, and their concern is, I think part of the concern is, they're not going to get reimbursed for that telephone call that we all managed when we were interns. We were all in these 400 plus bed hospitals, intern, second years, doing a lot of medical care over the phone. I think part of it is that also that the time is not valued. And the funny thing is that when the doctor's time is valued, the patients don't call. They don't call because, number one, they have a good relationship with their doctor. They know they have access to their doctor. And if the patient does call, the doctors know there must be something real serious going on over here. But most of the time, what we find is that, hey, we ask the patients, why didn't you call us? And they're like, oh, well, it's your time. We know that this is your time, and we knew we could see you on a Monday or whenever, and it could wait over the weekend. And this is what I did to get over the weekend. I didn't. And by the way, the main driver of patients away from the emergency room setting in a good primary care model is the trust in the doctor-patient relationship. When a patient, especially a medically complex patient, has a good relationship with the primary care doctor, they don't want to go see some random doctor or nurse practitioner in the emergency room. They're going to go to the person who knows them best, or the care delivery system that knows them best.
Cool.
Well, this was a great discussion.
I mean, you folks have been super kind. Listen, thank you to all the viewers and all the listeners. Like, you guys have been just awesome. So thank you. And Dr. Dan, Dr. Faisel, thank you so much for having me. I
have one question I'm seeing here from Henry Soderberg. Henry, thank you so much for your question.
Oh, Henry, up in Michigan. Welcome.
Yes. So he has a great question, and he said, outside of the Medicare Advantage population, are physicians able to practice full risk? That's a great question. Currently, the full risk model exists in the Medicare Advantage space, and the vast majority of people, obviously, who have Medicare Advantage are over the age of 65. Now we are seeing people who are under the age of 65 in Medicare Advantage, the dual eligibles. But now the full risk model, you have to understand.
I'll tell you where it is.
Here, why don't you go first, and then
when you are a physician at the on-site, near-site clinic of an employer, because who's taking full risk is the employer. Because keep in mind, a self-funded employer runs an insurance company. I mean, they are an insurance company. They are not Blue Cross. They are not United. They are not Cigna. They are not Aetna. It says that on the card, but none of those insurance carriers carry any risk. All they're doing is what's referred to as administrative only services, ASO only services. They're Visa. That's all they are. They just facilitate a transaction. They do not bear risk. The definition of insurance is the transference of risk. In that situation, there is no transference of risk. The employer bears the risk. The full risk model is the employer, and you as the physician for that company are part of a team that is bearing that risk. And I tell you, in Wisconsin, almost every single municipality and school system has an on-site clinic. And almost every single manufacturing plant in South Carolina and Tennessee has a doctor. And more companies in Texas are having doctors. So there is absolutely full risk for physicians outside of Medicare Advantage. And that's how it manifests itself.
Yeah. But I would say one of the issues with that is that if you're doing the employer and you've got that ASO, the insurance company still keeps all the data. So maybe you're running the insurance company, but you're not getting the data you need to manage the illness. Because
listen,
I have been on that side.
Podcast about that.
That's a whole other issue here. So Medicare. Yeah, Medicare Advantage is the one place where the doctors are actually in the full risk model giving the data they need to manage the patient's illnesses, because it does take more information than you actually get just in the exam room just by yourself. But I agree. I think the health and some of the employees are starting to wake up, but it's still got a ways to go until that data gets shared to be able to do true population health in those populations.
It's essentially Visa not letting you look at your credit card statement and just saying, "Oh yeah, your credit card statement is $2,500. You can't look at it, but you need to pay $2,500."
Yeah. Just trust us.
Yeah.
You ran up all those charges. You need to pay them, right? Yeah.
And for Henry, I think one of the main reasons that you're seeing the employers taking on the risks is because the hospital expenses. Number one, the hospital visits are so unnecessary. And number two, the costs are just so through the roof that they're willing to take the gamble to let the doctors manage their patients in the outpatient setting, because the savings are just there. They see the value in primary care much, much more than sadly most of the insurance companies, and really the ones who are benefiting from a model that drives care towards. And I'm not even concerned about the specialty care. Let's just start with the hospitals. If we had to start somewhere, I would say let's start with the unnecessary hospitalizations, and let's focus on good and on access to primary care. And remember that as a country, we have a young patient population. The American people, we're only 37, 38 years old. They only have 15% of our population, 45 million people over the age of 65. When I think about the medically complex. And then we've got a country filled with pre-diabetics, and a third of us are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and half of us have cardiovascular disease. But the good news is we've got technology. We've got all these nurse practitioners and physician assistants. I just feel like the value of the doctor's time is not there in the fee-for-service model for primary care.
There you go.
Wow.
But you got alternatives. You got choices. Just got to make it happen. Make it happen, America. You can do it.
You can do it. Well, Dr. Bricker, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me. You guys have been fantastic as always. Thank you to ChenMed. Thank you, Dr. Dan. Thank you, Dr. Faisel.
Dr. Dan, what an evening. This was a wonderful evening. I am so passionate about educating doctors in particular about other options outside of the fee-for-service world. Sadly, 95% of our healthcare delivery system is still fee-for-service. So, and to our audience, thank you all so much for joining as well. For more information about today's topic and to explore career opportunities with ChenMed, hey, we're opening 500 centers over the next 5 years. I'm hiring over 2,000 doctors. We're hiring over 2,000 doctors at least over the next 5 years. We need good primary care doctors and all the support teams for them. Please visit chenmed.com. We believe access to primary care is a right, not a privilege.